your interest is travel photography, this is the place. My guest today is travel photographer Tom Schwabel. Welcome,
Sure.
Tom.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, how did you get started as a travel photographer?
Well, I think you got to go all the way back to the beginning to when I got started in photography. So that was back in high school. I actually took a year or two of high school darkroom classes on an old black and white 35 millimeter film camera. So that's kind of where I got my start with photography, actually developing the film and printing the images in the darkroom. And then I headed off to college, and school and life kind of got in the way, and I didn't do much photography for several years. And then I found myself moving to the Pacific Northwest. And if you know anything about the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of very scenic places in the Pacific Northwest. And I started doing a lot of hiking, a lot of mountain climbing. The first few years I was out here, I climbed a lot of the volcanoes out here, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, even Mount Shasta down in California. And I'd bring along a camera to kind of take pictures of things. Stuff looked pretty amazing to me, and I kind of wanted to document it and share it with family back east. I continued to do photography, and then I think it was 2006. A friend of mine who's a pretty big traveler invited me along on a trip to the Galapagos. And at first I was like, I don't even know where the Galapagos are, but okay, this sounds interesting. And so I said, well, sure, why not? Go to the Galapagos. And so that was my first real trip, and also the first trip where I had a digital SLR. I actually adopted digital pretty early. I had a point and shoot before that, but I got an SLR for the Galapagos. And then it just kind of built from there. And I found myself taking other trips with friends who like to travel and who were into photography. And then I think what really was a big shift for me is when I started sharing my work online. I joined Flickr, I think it's probably 2006 or 7. Started sharing my work there, and I just was seeing all this amazing work, and there was a very active community on Flickr. Photographers really interacting with each other, really meaningful interaction. Groups, meetups, actually in person, and just lots of really inspiring work. That just started giving me all kinds of ideas for other places that I could go, and things that I could do, and just goals to try and get better, to get to be able to photograph at the same level as a lot of the people that I was following on Flickr. So that's really how it got started. I think the trips have gotten progressively more complicated and involved since then. And in the past 5 or 10 years, I've started to try and market my work and try and get it published and actually get it out there. And it's just rewarding to see your travels out there, and other people able to see them and enjoy them as well. So that's
Sure.
kind of how it all got started.
Well, the Galapagos is certainly a nice place to start. I've been there myself, and it's an amazing place for sure.
Yeah, the wildlife certainly is unafraid there.
Yes, you have to be careful you don't step on them.
Yeah.
So your first love obviously is landscape photography. Talk about how you find your landscape locations and how you compose your shots. And I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at an image you did of the Grand Canyon, which is quite spectacular. And maybe we can use that as a jumping off point.
Okay. So I guess, first of all, in terms of coming up with places to go and ideas, I spend a lot of time, a tremendous amount of time, looking at other photos and gathering inspiration, looking at travel publications, travel blogs, all those sorts of things. I think that's always been a big thing for me is just gaining inspiration. And I have several landscape photographers that are really inspiring for me that I love to follow. David Thompson, Daniel Cordan, Yuri over in Iceland, Art Wolf, Ryan Dar, Marcel Van Oosten, just lots of really fantastic work to get inspired and get ideas on places to go. And so my interests tend to fall in kind of, when photographing a place, trying to kind of photograph it under kind of more optimal conditions, or conditions that are kind of passing, that aren't always there. So I love fall color. I love snow. I love fog. So I plan a lot of my travels focusing on seasons, focusing on weather, focusing on when the wildflower bloom is, focusing on places that are a bit more off the beaten path. Now, obviously, the Grand Canyon isn't really off the beaten path by any sense of the word, but it's a lot less busy in the winter. And this was taken in the winter a few years ago. So I try and go to places when other people aren't going to these places, to try and catch something different than what they might see. You'll notice a lot of my travels tend to focus on kind of the more polar regions. I've been to the Norwegian Arctic, I've been to Antarctica, Alaska, Canadian Rockies. These are all places that climate change is affecting quite a bit. And these beautiful glaciers and all these things that we love to look at, they're going away in a noticeable way. And so I try and prioritize getting to those places and seeing them and being able to photograph them. A lot of the places that I go, obviously, are very iconic places. Iconic places are iconic for a reason, right? I mean, they speak to people. People go there all the time. They're beautiful. They're what I might call target-rich environments. There's just a lot of things that you can point your camera at. And so for something like the Grand Canyon right here, I went to the Grand Canyon in the winter because my goal was to capture the iconic Grand Canyon covered in snow. And I actually did do that. I was there for several days, and we got, I think, 3 inches of snow one morning. And then I think the next day we got almost a foot of snow that went all the way down to the Colorado River. And I love those shots, but and I try and check off iconic shots first, just kind of get those out of the way, and then I dig deeper and I'm looking for something that I can maybe call uniquely my own or different. And this scene here is exactly that. This was not something that I planned. It wasn't a shot that I had set out to the Grand Canyon to take, but it ended up being the most successful shot of the trip. It's the one that I think resonates with people the most because it is very different, I think, than most Grand Canyon shots you'll see. And this was just the middle of the day. And there'd been a snowstorm that morning that had dumped about 3 inches, as I said, on the canyon. And the sun came up and melted all that, but there was this fog that just kind of settled into the canyon and stayed there. And it, at times it obscured the canyon completely, but for 5 or 10 minutes, it opened up to show just these buttes, and you could see only these buttes in the canyon and nothing else. And I just thought it was so interesting to just see them just kind of rising out of the fog like that. And so I was pretty happy to get that shot.
Yeah, that's a gorgeous shot. Was a telephoto lens? It looks like you're.
Yeah, so I actually did write down I didn't write down the settings for this shot. I wrote down some of the ones that we might talk about later. I didn't for this, but this would have been handheld with a telephoto. It was really one of those quick moments. There wasn't really time to set up a tripod or wait for the changing light or anything like that. This scene came and went relatively quickly.
Well, the fog certainly makes it interesting and gives it a lot of depth, and colors.
Yeah.
Colors are amazing.
Yeah, fortunately, you had that kind of lower angle winter sunlight. So, this was midday, but since it was in the winter, still got some shadows there to, I think, give it a little bit more depth. So,
yeah.
But, that's the thing I find about, when we talk about composing shots, with travel photography, you have to be flexible, because you have limited times in these places. And as opposed to somebody who might live in Flagstaff and can go up to the Grand Canyon every weekend and wait for the perfect conditions, when you're doing travel photography, you have to adapt to the conditions that you get. And for better or worse, sometimes that means that the conditions that you hoped for or were planning for or really wanted to get, you're not going to get those. So you just kind of build on your experience adapting. And just trying to make do. And sometimes you only get one chance, and that's one thing I've learned time and time again is a lot of times you only get one chance. So knowing your equipment is really key, and knowing your settings, because like I said, this was gone in 5 minutes. There was only one chance for this.
Yeah, that's good advice for a lot of photographic genres. And
I've definitely made mistakes before. For instance, shooting the aurora in Iceland, I had one night where we had fantastic aurora, and I hadn't perfected my ability to get tack sharp focused on the stars in the night sky. And so I came home with about half a night's worth of images that would have been fantastic, but the stars were fuzzy little balls instead of points. And live and learn. So you always want to try and be practiced and prepared for the big game, so to speak.
Right. Well, that certainly had to be disappointing.
Yeah.
Say the least.
Yeah, that was a very successful Grand Canyon trip. I was very pleased with because I got what I set out to get, and I got all that bonus fog that I didn't expect to get. So
yeah,
very happy about that.
Be prepared, as the saying goes.
Yeah.
So in terms of your work, are you working on assignment or mostly freelance, or how does that part work?
I am 100% freelance. My focus is really, I focus on capturing things that are interesting to me. And really my goal whenever I go out shooting is to come home with an image that I would actually be happy to hang on my own wall.
Sure.
That comes first before anything else. I've done a wedding or two here and there. and it's very stressful
Yeah.
because when you're on assignment, are you going to mess up? Are you not going to be able to produce what your client is looking for? And I would prefer not to deal with that stress. So um, I've worked with a number of stock photo agencies and just been able to license images on my own on the side, and that's kind of what I've been doing.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you on wedding photographer. I don't need that stress either.
Yeah.
So, how has COVID affected your ability to travel and do photographs and such?
Uh, it's had a pretty major effect. I think that probably goes without saying. I was actually scheduled to go to my last continent, would have been my seventh continent, in April of 2020. I was going to go to Australia and spend a few weeks there, photographing various icons around mostly the eastern and central part of the country. And, Australia is still not open. And I just read, I think today, New Zealand is not going to open to Americans until October 2022 at the earliest. So, I mean, they all have been closed 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the quarantine restrictions, like places that are open, the quarantine restrictions and the testing restrictions just make it very difficult to be able to pull off any sort of trip, especially one that has any sort of complexity with, crossing multiple borders and things like that. So I was fortunate enough in 2021 to actually make it outside the country twice. Once to Iceland, just after they opened to tourists and they were letting people with vaccine cards come in quarantine free. And then I was able to make it to the Galapagos in Ecuador, my second trip there actually in September because they were open.
Nice.
But, I spent a lot of 2020 mining my archives. Going through, looking at old photos, editing photos, finding gems hidden in my archives. And I also started some new kind of side pet projects. One of them was I started looking into astrophotography, actually doing deep space astrophotography of, like nebula and galaxies and things like that. And then more recently, I got a drone. And I'm still practicing with it. There's nothing there that I would consider, worthy of sharing. But these are, just different things that I've started doing to kind of pass the time.
Sure.
I mean, it's, and at least from the photography business aspect, I mean, obviously the travel thing is a big thing, but we've seen a lot of shifts in the photography business. I exhibit work in wineries, and there hasn't, wineries have been closed. People have been tasting outside. The tasting rooms have been closed, so nobody is seeing my art in person. It's not, I'm not able to sell it there. In-flight magazines, all those sorts of things aren't being published anymore. So the business has changed a lot. One thing I did do to kind of adapt in 2020 is I started offering jigsaw puzzles of my images, and especially in the early parts of COVID, that was very popular because everybody was home. So
Right.
it's you're constantly having to adapt. I've got some trips coming up this year that I don't want to jinx it, so I'm not even going to say what they might be. We'll just see if they happen or not. But you have to be flexible now.
Yeah, the business keeps getting tougher and tougher, I think, all the way around.
Yeah, I mean, it was getting tougher. I mean, the photography business in general was getting tougher even before COVID. It's just
exactly.
even harder now. So
yeah. Well, let's talk about the gear you use and why before we take a look at your photos. So talk about that a bit.
So I've been exclusively on Nikon pretty much ever since my first DSLR. Actually, I think I had an N65 before my first DSLR. So I did have a film body. I'm currently using a D850. I love that camera. It's almost the perfect camera body. It's almost the one I always wanted. Of course, I wish it would have lower noise. I think I'm a pixel peeper, so
Yeah.
All Nikon glass, 16 to 35, 24 to 70, 2.8, very sharp, 70 to 200, 2.8, again, very sharp. And one lens that I've become particularly fond of in the past few years is I bought the 200 to 500 f5.6. I originally bought that to photograph the solar eclipse in 2017, but I have found a ton of uses for it since then. Used it in safari in Africa for wildlife, currently using it for astrophotography. And I've also found it to be an interesting lens for landscapes. The one consideration that I always have to make with travel is weight.
Sure.
A lot of the places, like when I was in Africa, I think we had a carry-on plus checked baggage, I think was 50 pounds total. And when your camera gear takes up 20 of that, 20 or 25 of that, it makes it difficult. So, I have a very lightweight Manfrotto tripod. A lot of my friends that stay more local use much bigger, heavier tripods. I mean, it works for me. Sometimes it could be more stable. But yeah, I mean, the glass though, I can't really compromise on the glass. The D850 has enough resolution that if you don't have good glass, you're going to see it right away. So I do have those heavier lenses, but I think you've got to use those with that body.
You shoot any mirrorless?
I haven't considered the transition to mirrorless at all. Strangely enough, I do have a Sony entry-level mirrorless I've played with a bit, but I don't use that a lot. I only use it when I need something really, really small and really, really lightweight.
So you don't have a Z9 then either, huh?
Not considering one at this point. I'm assuming that the Nikon DSLR series is probably going to come to an end soon. I haven't seen any announcements, but as long as the D850 continues to work for me, I'm not really planning at this point any upgrades.
Yeah, it's a great camera from everything I've heard and people I've talked to. So
Yeah.
why change if it does what you need it to do, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's share my screen again and look at some of your photos. It's a volcano, obviously, but
It is a volcano.
where is it?
So this was actually taken just last year in Iceland. I think in March, volcanic eruption started in Iceland, and it became quite the event to see. And this actually wasn't my first time shooting lava. I have been in Hawaii, at Hawaii volcanoes, and I've shot lava there before. But this was just on a whole different scale. And, I know Bruce Omari in Hawaii. He's a big lava photographer and a friend of mine. And we were talking about this event in Iceland and just how incredible it was, and how rare it would be to see an event of this magnitude and be able to see it up close relatively safely. So when Iceland started to open to tourists, I realized, once I had completed my vaccination, that I could actually get into Iceland quarantine free, and there were flights and hotels available, and the country wasn't that busy. So I made a pretty last minute decision to just hop on over there to Iceland, and I think I was only there 5 days. That's all the time I had to devote to this. And weather in Iceland, especially in pretty much all year round, but in the spring is notorious for being often very bad. And so when we arrived in Iceland, the first 2 days, I think we had 90-mile-an-hour winds, and it was just pouring rain. So obviously we didn't shoot the volcano those days. The third day, we were finally able to get up to the volcano. And one thing that I've learned about volcanoes from Hawaii is how dynamic and changing a volcanic environment is when an eruption is happening. Lava flows come and go very quickly. Things change very quickly. The composition that you thought you wanted or that you could work with an hour ago no longer works now because the lava has moved or it's cooled. And so I was trying to find a way to get a scene where I could incorporate a foreground of molten lava. And so I was able to get in front of this, this lava flow kind of on the edge of what you're looking at here is actually a giant lava lake that's mostly crusted over, but there's molten lava underneath. Who knows how far underneath, probably in some cases only inches, probably some cases several feet. But I was able to get in front of it, and you know it was moving, but it wasn't moving so fast that I couldn't keep in front of it. But I wanted this molten lava in the foreground, and you know I had to time this shot for when the vent in the background actually started to fountain, and it was fairly predictable when it would fountain. I think it was about every 15 or 20 minutes go off, and you'd get a fountain of fresh lava that was, I think they were saying it was about 400 feet high those days. But I was in this spot, it was very uncomfortably hot. I was probably only about 15 or 20 feet from the molten lava. It was, you actually needed to have a jacket on to protect yourself from the heat. It was just incredible. And the interesting thing about this shot is it's not tack sharp. And you know, when I started looking at the images, I was like, oh, this is kind of soft and mushy because you're shooting over this giant field of 2100 degree lava. So you have all this heat distortion and waviness, and after thinking about it for a while, I was like, you know what, that's what it looked like. And the waviness and the distortion just tells you how hot it was. So, but you know, we were able to spend 2 days there, and you know, things were constantly changing. But this was one of the only opportunities I was really able to get the lava really close up in the foreground like this. So, but it was a mind-blowing experience. I don't know that the photos could even convey it, but I'm definitely glad that I made that last-minute trip.
Yeah, it's a wonderful photo of all the lava in the foreground, you know, compliments
You know, I got photos later in that evening with some really nice sunset light. You know, some much warmer sunset light, but at that time there was no lava flowing in any foreground place where I could incorporate it. So it's a different shot. I don't know. I think I kind of like this one more, even though it's, you know, more middle of the day light. But
looks pretty darn good to me. Glad you survived to tell about it.
yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about shooting lava is there are all kinds of hazards. And you know, I think most people look at this shot and they're like, oh, you're too close to that lava fountain in the background. That's not what you should be worried about here. There's all kinds of other hazards in a lava field that you need to worry about more than that. So
including toxic gases, I guess.
toxic gas and yeah, all kinds of things like that.
So what lens did you use here?
Do
you remember?
I think this is probably the 24-70.
Okay.
Again, handheld. You know, I think a lot of the shots I'm sharing today are all handheld because they, you know, they were not shots that I had a lot of time to set up or plan for. You just had to kind of run with it.
Yeah.
And in this case, like I said, I was trying to stand in front of this advancing molten lava, which means, I couldn't park my tripod. I had to be constantly on the move.
Yeah, I would think
So
so. Well, good. Good photo or a great photo, and sounds like a great trip. So this looks like it's in the Great Plains somewhere.
yeah, so this is in the Great Plains. So this was, again, I have a friend, a few friends, photographer friends that were running storm chasing workshops in the Great Plains last summer. And I'd always wanted to go storm chasing. I've got, a bucket list of things that I'd love to photograph someday. And somewhere on that bucket list was lightning and tornadoes. And so, once I realized last year that, well, international travel is probably still going to be largely off limits, I said, well, you know what, I can devote a few weeks to storm chasing. And so I ended up, I think, on a 2-week trip, starting in Denver. I don't remember how many states we went to. It was a lot of states, a lot of miles on the road.
Sure.
This was shot in Wyoming. At the end of a very difficult and frustrating chase day, we had a meteorologist who, in the morning, Steve was remarkable in his ability to look at all kinds of different weather data and figure out, where there were going to potentially be storm cells developing that we could try and intercept in the evening. Usually all the storm chase action happens in the late afternoon. That's when the storms develop and get large. But we had this really frustrating day of we were trying to get on one cell and we couldn't because the road network just wasn't allowing us to get from point A to point B. But we finally ended up on this small little cell, and it was actually developing as we arrived right at sunset. And again, it's one of those things where you, like a lot of the other things that we've shared so far today, it wasn't something I could really plan for too much. You kind of have to run with it. And normally I'm a person that tries to eliminate non-natural things from my photo, but in this case, I realized, you know what, the road's there, the storm's at the end of the road, you've got to embrace that and actually use it. And fortunately, the storm cooperated, and I was able to get some lightning down there on the end. This storm went on later in the evening to produce a tremendous amount of lightning after dark. So I do have some other shots after dark of it, but it ended up being one of our more productive days after a very frustrating start.
Well, the road makes a great leading line.
Yeah, and the funny thing is there's different techniques and approaches to shooting lightning, and I think a bunch of us had all started with the lightning trigger, and basically trips when it sees kind of the first stroke of the lightning, and we found that just sometimes it would work, but a lot of times, especially when there was frequent enough lighting, it was honestly just better to just keep shooting and just throw out all the frames where you don't have lightning later on. And so I think this was like a 1 or 2 second exposure, and I probably took dozens and just threw all the way the ones that didn't have lightning. So
well, you've got cloud to ground lightning, or the other way around, however you like it. And
yeah, some cloud to cloud over there as well.
There,
yeah.
I guess this is cloud to cloud too.
Well, that's I think just some sunlight, some reflected sunlight. Yeah, this storm had actually started a brush fire just over to the left of just outside the frame there that I think probably you don't really want brush fires, but when they add a bunch of smoke to the atmosphere, it does color up your sunset. So
sure, got some nice they look like lenticular clouds up here.
Yeah, that's actually what you're looking at there is the core of the I guess a mesocyclone that's in the process of developing right there. So would eventually grow to be much, much larger and have a giant anvil cloud on top of it of its own. And yeah.
So did you wait for this car or truck to come over the hill?
No, that was just, the frame that had the best lightning just happened to have that car there. And
Uh,
I contemplated whether the car adds or detracts, but I think actually it adds. So
yeah, I would agree. Yeah, another wonderful photo. Okay, your astrophotography.
So this was taken in Namibia a few years ago. I did a month in Africa. I spent 2 weeks in Namibia, and then I spent 2 weeks in Botswana and Zambia and Zimbabwe, and a little bit of South Africa too. And I'd gone to Namibia for the iconic landscapes. There's sand dunes there. There's incredible sand dune covered ghost towns, um, incredible looking trees called quiver trees that are very famous. And so we rented a car and we actually drove ourselves around Namibia, if you can believe it, for 2 weeks. And this was at a lodge that we were staying at in the central Kalahari Desert. And I'd seen pictures in Namibia of the Milky Way and, how incredible it is. And, it's such a dark place because I think it is one of the least populated countries in Africa. And it's also one of the biggest countries in Africa. So that literally means there's nobody there. And this was taken just out front of our bungalow.
Oh,
There was an acacia tree across the way there that with a big giant social weaver bird nest in it. And I originally hadn't set out to shoot this as a pano. I'd never done a astrophotography pano before. But I took a few shots of the tree with the Milky Way over it, and I realized that, you know what, you really need to see the whole Milky Way here. You need to see the whole arc of it. You've got these other interesting satellite galaxies of the Milky Way that are visible in the southern hemisphere, the Magellanic clouds over there.
is that what this is?
Yeah, those are satellite galaxies of the Milky Way. And believe it or not, you can see those very plainly with your own eyes. It's that dark in Africa, at least in this part of Namibia. And so I ended up composing the shot. There was a small village, I think 3 or 4 miles away with a gas station. And I mean, when we're saying small, we're talking really small. But it emitted a bit of light pollution. And the way that the shot just kind of worked out, I realized, well, you know what, maybe I should just put the light pollution behind the tree. And so I think it actually worked out pretty well. And then I ended up doing I think this was a 4 or 5 slice vertical pano with a 24 millimeter, I think 1.4 lens. And I mean, ultimately, I wanted to get a shot of the iconic quiver trees with the Milky Way. And I found some, but this shot, actually, I think it just worked out better. I think the light pollution, just everything about it actually worked out really well. So this ended up being my favorite night shot from there.
Again, a wonderful photo. So this coloration down here is from what do you think?
I think that's probably what you would call air glow. I don't really know quite the principles behind it, but I mean, you could see stars pretty much clear down to the horizon in every direction, and I can't think of anywhere I've ever been where I could see something like that.
Oh, pretty amazing. Okay, so this is somewhere in or near Antarctica, I guess.
This was, we talked earlier about photographic inspiration, and I'd never even heard of South Georgia Island before until I believe it was an episode of Travels to the Edge by Art Wolfe.
Uh,
And I don't know if you've ever seen that show. It was a PBS show that ran for a while, where he would basically go around to different far-flung destinations, and one of them was South Georgia. And so that kind of stuck in my mind for years. And then I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica, and I said, if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. We have to make the side trip to South Georgia Island, which I think was going to add another 2 to 4 days at sea. And I think we were on the island, 4 days in total. So not a huge amount of time. But this was our very first landing site on the island. This is a place called Salisbury Plain. I believe it has the largest concentration of king penguins anywhere in the world. You're not actually seeing even the bulk of the colony here. The bulk of the colony is actually to the right of this shot. But this shot's one of my favorites because of the glaciated, really just jagged, rugged mountains in the background. And that's what attracted me to South Georgia, was the landscape with the wildlife in it. I don't know of anywhere else in the world where you can get, such prominent landscape or, wildlife within a landscape.
uh,
And the grass here, and you've got some baby penguins wandering around all over the place here. These brown chicks are about 11 months old at the time, and it was kind of interesting composing a landscape shot where your foreground is all wildlife, and they're moving around, and sometimes they're getting too close to the camera, or they're not in good position, so you just kind of have to wait and see what happens. But this was a very successful morning. I found this often with travel photography trips, is often there's one morning of an entire trip that makes or breaks the entire trip. And this was it, because we had wonderful light that morning. We had, for a while, it actually snowed on us, so we got some fresh snow. We had all these penguins here. It was just, it was sensory overload. It's just amazing.
yeah. Yeah, what I like about your photos in general is that you go to iconic places, but you make them your own by getting unique perspectives that other photographers don't in general.
Yeah, this was one. I think I shot this with this was a wide angle lens.
Sure looks like
And
it.
I'd gotten pretty close to that penguin that's just kind of sitting in the tussock grass there, and I probably have dozens or maybe even hundreds of shots from this scene, and where I just got kind of down to penguin level. I think in general with wildlife shooting, you want to be at the animal level. So that meant that in South Georgia, I was crawling around in a lot of penguin poop and mud all the time, because I had to be at penguin level.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes or breaks a wildlife photo for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a gorgeous photo. I love the mountains in the background, along with the
Yeah,
penguins.
the landscape there is just incredible by itself, and then to be able to add wildlife into it, so
Yeah,
much wildlife into it.
yeah. So these are the quiver trees.
These are not quiver trees.
Uh,
I actually don't know that I've even published any photos of quiver trees from Namibia. I don't think I have, actually, but this was from a different trip. This is actually a rather old photo. This was probably one of the first photos that I took that kind of got me really serious into travel and landscape photography, and actually trying to make it more than just a casual obsession. This was taken on safari in Tanzania.
Oh,
Gosh, more than 10 years ago now. And this was in our camp in I think it was Tarangire National Park, and these are baobab trees.
oh, okay.
And I think there's several different species of baobab trees. I think the most iconic baobab trees that you ever see are the ones in Madagascar. I think there's a location there called Avenue of the Baobabs, and those are, you know, really tall, strange-looking trees. And these trees were in our safari camp. And you know, I think around this time I was just starting to toy with the idea of taking pictures at night, but we had a full moon. And so, you know, I was like, well, I can't really take any pictures of the stars by themselves. That's not really going to work with the full moon. Everything was washed out. And these trees were right next to the campfire. And I think we looked up from the campfire and, you know, realized, well, you know, the campfire is kind of nicely lighting these trees. The moon is nicely lighting them behind. But then we decided to get a little adventurous. There was a group of us, and we wanted to see if we couldn't make the lighting on these trees even more interesting, kind of accentuate the kind of spookiness of them. So we actually got somebody to run behind the two trees with a speed light. And actually, it took a fair amount of practice because they had to make sure that when they popped the speed light, they were actually standing behind the trunk of the tree so that you couldn't actually see them or the speed light. And then they would run over to the next tree and do the same thing. And I think they may have ran back and forth a few times. And so this was the end result. I think it was a 1 minute exposure in total. And this actually ended up being a National Geographic photo of the day.
Oh, nice.
Several years ago. It's definitely, of the shots that I got in Tanzania, it resonated far more with people than any of the animal shots that I took on that trip. And, you know, that's why I went there. I went there for the animal shots, but this was the shot that resonated with people. So
very, very nice. And they had to make sure that it didn't get eaten by lions while they were running around in the dark.
oh, funny story. Yeah. So on this one, while we were shooting this in our camp, I mean, we're in a camp that's in the middle of the park. There's no fence. It was a tented camp. We had a guard from the Tanzanian army in our camp. I mean, he was practically a kid. I think he was probably 16 or 17, wandering around with an AK-47. And while we were shooting this, he came up to us and said, "You got to go in your tent. It's not safe. It's, you need to go inside your tent. It's not safe." And, we kind of look at each other and we're like, I mean, our tent is, 50 feet over that way, 100 feet over that way. Like, how bad can this possibly be? But, he insisted. So we finished up and finally went in. And I think about 20 minutes later, I'm getting ready for bed and I hear some rattling out back of the tent. And I just assumed that it was the camp staff cleaning up. And the next morning, I'm usually not a morning person. So I wander into breakfast a little late and the dining tent is abuzz. Everybody's talking about something exciting. And I'm like, what's everybody so excited about? And they're like, "Did you see the lions last night?" No. Yeah. So those noises that we heard out back of our camp were the camp staff had some shower buckets they hadn't emptied the water out of, and the lions had come in to drink all the water out of the shower buckets.
Uh-huh.
So there were lions in the camp that night, but we survived.
Yeah, again, you survived. Well, I'm going to stop sharing. I think that's the last of the photos. And there we're back. Wow. Well, you had some exciting trips.
Yeah, I'm hoping this year I've got one that's just going on to the books right now that I'm very excited about if it happens, but I don't want to say too much because I don't want to jinx it in the time of COVID. So
Yeah, for
you
sure.
just have to stay tuned, and if it happens, you'll know. So
Okay. So I noticed you're kind of all over social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Flickr. So do you have a website besides? I couldn't find
I
one.
do. So I have a website, like I said, mentioned earlier. I started selling puzzles last year, and so I have a website that's basically on Fine Art America. It's my name, tom-schwabel.pixels.com. And it has prints and greeting cards and jigsaw puzzles of a lot of my work. But in addition to that, I do have a lot of social media presence. I kind of try social media for a while, and if I don't feel like I'm getting any traction, I kind of abandon it and move on to a different platform. So that's why I'm kind of all over the place. I've kind of given up on Facebook. It's not a fan of Facebook. I do still pretty active on Instagram, although my Instagram photos tend to be only cell phone shots. I don't think a lot of people realize that I don't post my actual portfolio on Instagram. It's usually kind of cell phone shots that are kind of taken to show what I'm up to. And then, of course, LinkedIn. And another one that I really like is a site called Vero. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It is a social media site that basically its claim is no algorithms. And it
Okay.
actually has a very kind of grassroots, authentic photography community on it that I feel is generally pretty engaged and authentic. And so I do spend some time on there as well. But my favorite is and always has been Flickr. That's where I got my start. That's where I continue to be. I just it's a great place. I just wish more people would come back to it. I think it's kind of seen a bit of a renaissance in the past few years, people coming back to it, but I'd love to see more people come back to it. It's a fun site.
Yeah, it was big in the day and then kind of fell into disfavor. And like you say, it sounds like it's
But
coming back.
I've been trying to push a lot of my photographer friends to go back to it. I know so many people are frustrated with Facebook. They've given. I mean, I've pretty much given up on Facebook. People don't like that they don't get any reach on Facebook. They don't like all the non-photography stuff that goes on Facebook. So I just really would encourage people to go back to Flickr and give it another try if they haven't already.
Well, thanks for sharing your beautiful photos and your expertise, Tom. It's been a great pleasure having you on Photographing the West. So I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. I'm certainly glad to have had the opportunity to share a little here, and hopefully somebody finds it useful. So
Well, I'm sure they will. So each episode of Photographing the West is published on the 15th and 30th of the month. If you enjoy these podcasts, please consider purchasing your camera equipment or outdoor gear through my Amazon affiliate links in the show notes. Tune in on April 30th for an episode on horse photography with Phyllis Burchett. Until then, stay safe and get out and make some photos.